I'm here with Jordan Mack from the Nervos Foundation, the myth, the man, the legend. Um,
Oh, hardly a legend, hardly at all.
oh, come on, man. I think the community sees you as that at this point.
No, no, no. The community sees me as a guy who's been around, but the first question that comes out is, did you meet Satoshi ever? Or have you talked to Satoshi? He's the legend. And no, I have not. I showed up a couple months after he disappeared. So I'm not the legend.
You
Satoshi
really?
is still the legend. Yeah,
That on the timeline, you got into Bitcoin a couple months after he vanished?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, like at the time, actually, we all thought he was coming back. Well, a lot of us did. He said that he had actually previously said that he was leaving, and then he kept like poking his head back in a couple more times. So we kind of just thought he was going to come back. I did personally, at least, and some of the people I talked to, but he never did.
wow. I didn't know that about you. Yeah. I guess I never knew what your background sort of what or your entry point was in crypto. So that's interesting to know. But in the spirit of Satoshi, you moved on to Nervos.
Yes, I did. Nervos is a project that very much follows in the footsteps of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin at this point I always say that its strongest point is that it's Bitcoin. It's basically a brand name at this point. It hasn't really kept up on the technology. The tokenomics haven't really evolved at all.
Right.
All that they go around and really say is that there will only be ever 21 million Bitcoin, right? That's the selling point.
Yeah.
And even though that is in some regards a very strong point to have a deflationary currency, the technology and everything really hasn't evolved much at all since actually I first joined. It's some of the things that they were talking about all the way back in 2011 um, are still not really implemented. Like when I first joined in the community, there was talk about sharding and all that kind of stuff, right? That still doesn't really exist. Not on Bitcoin. It doesn't really exist too much on other chains as well. It's a very, very tough concept. But not even really smart contracts truly exist on chain on Bitcoin, which is a big thing that I think holds it back. But anyway, like you said with Nervos, like why have I moved on to Nervos? Well, it embodies a lot of the same values about decentralization, about permissionlessness, and it also embodies things that Bitcoin doesn't have, which is flexibility and really powerful smart contracts. These are some of the areas that it really excels, and also one of the biggest ones, one of the ones that actually got me into Nervos in the first place was the tokenomics of the platform, which are the best tokenomics I've seen in any project so far, and also the most sustainable, which is important to me because we're trying to build systems that will last decades that can power the entire world's currency. They need to be sustainable. And again, this is one where Bitcoin has kind of fallen flat. There's a lot of argument within the community on how the chain is going to pay for the proof of work in the far future, and there isn't really a solid answer. Ultimately, I think that the answer is actually the exact opposite of what they keep saying. They keep saying there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. I think they're going to remove that cap, and that's the only way that they're going to keep the chain going.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's been proposed by one of the core developers, and it's been stated in the community. I think that's the only way at this point. Either that or they adopt some wildly different tokenomics.
So you think there's going to be a future hard fork?
Probably. It's either that or it goes into a place of unsustainability. I don't really see it existing in the future as it is today.
Yeah, it was highly experimental for its time, and the block subsidy going to zero um puts the security in danger of being completely torn to shreds. So Nervos basically um continued that and added a subsidy that would last forever. And
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 I can explain that one because that's an important point. What they did was they added a subsidy where there's effectively a tail emission. So it keeps giving block rewards even after the main block reward halves over and over again, just like Bitcoin, and eventually goes away. There's a continued subsidy that goes to miners of a fixed amount. And the interesting part about this is that this is taken out of inflation, but only from people who occupy blockchain space. So it's targeted inflation. And what that means for long-term holders is that they actually get the exact same net effect that Bitcoin was trying to produce, so a fixed supply. When they take their tokens and they lock it into the, we call it the Nervos DAO, those tokens receive they receive interest payments which are equal to the inflation being created to pay the miners. So it offsets it 1 to 1. They are effectively using a deflationary currency at that point. So it's really a mix of both worlds there. You get the fixed supply, effectively fixed supply of Bitcoin, but in a very much more sustainable way. So, I mean, these tokenomics are a large part of the reason I got into the project, because I haven't seen any other project out there that comes close on that in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, when I started my journey into tokenomics and crypto economics and incentive compatibility, I remember I was on a repo, GitHub repo, and Nervos's white paper just happened to be at the very, very bottom of this long list of like crypto economic research papers that I was fanning through, and it was just like destiny um when I hit that link and finally read the Nervos white paper, because the the level of incentive compatibility and like the harmony in the network of having the people, like you said, the targeted inflation going to the people who are actually occupying state on the network, rather than just having it be a burden for everyone. It's targeted towards the people who are actually using the space. And it it opened up this like whole new conversation of like what is state explosion, and like how do we manage it, but not only how do we manage state explosion, which is like, the size of the blockchain state. um Not only how do we manage the state explosion, but how do we like capture value into the token or the coin so that the network is secure enough in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, like the tokenomics are really great for a lot of those different aspects, and including the state size limitation, which is another big problem in blockchains today. It's not necessarily the full history which is a problem. That's a different issue, but the state itself, the active um, layout of every single balance and everything on the chain is getting out of control on a lot of chains. Like in Ethereum, it's gigantic. It's getting to a level where it's starting to centralize the project because you have to have more and more powerful nodes in order to run this thing. And as it gets larger, it requires more and more computing power just to take care of, to
Yeah.
maintain it. So, I mean, Nervos has great tokenomics in that regard too. It has self-limiting depending on how many CK bytes exist, because the tokenomics says one CKB, one CK byte equals 1 byte of data storage. So you can never get more data storage than you have CK bytes in existence, which is a great limiting factor. That's why it's able to run on Raspberry Pis, which is another thing that Bitcoin has always tried to do, is make it accessible to just the general people by keeping the requirements low. But that's one of those things where there are definitely, I have to say that there are merits to platforms that have these bigger nodes that can run much faster. But that's really a different type of project, right? That's one that is suited for better for certain things, whereas Nervos is trying to be a project that's truly decentralized, truly global, truly permissionless, where you really need to have these kinds of values, where you can't sacrifice on the decentralization.
Yeah, it's basically trying to be the definition of decentralization. Like CKB itself is like the I always imagined it as syncing a CKB node. I'm sorry, syncing up a Nervos network node is like plugging in to the like digital metaverse, and that's the bare minimum requirement to be involved in that metaverse for all of time and all of history. It's basically setting like this a standard in stone that people can always access the network. So it's truly decentralized, it's truly permissionless. Anyone can be a node in it, and it's truly peer-to-peer. And it takes no compromise on those values.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's what it's trying to do. Make it completely accessible. Whereas some of the other projects, the bigger ones that have these massive nodes that require something like 16 cores and like 128 gigs of memory or something, and I don't even know how much disk space because they're using like hundreds of gigabytes per day. These things can only live in like data centers. Like that's the only place that they can live. And with those kinds of stiff requirements, there's only a couple locations they end up being, which makes them absolutely censorable. If the government came down and said we got to shut this thing down because like we don't like who's actually transacting on here, they'd be able to do so. So it's kind of important when you're trying to pick projects that you actually look at what the requirements of your project actually are, because there's plenty of projects that can are just fine for being in that kind of a state, right? They
Yeah.
go down for a couple days, a couple transactions get censored here, it doesn't matter. But if you're dealing with something so fundamental to humans, their value, their time, which is what money is essentially, it becomes a different question. In my opinion, we've already seen this play out through history on how it goes. It goes very badly when you empower another individual over another. And in
Right.
this case, I think it's too important to sacrifice, and we have to embrace the maximum level of decentralization on this one.
Yeah, and decentralization to a degree has has like a sense of neutrality. Like between each person, no one has the higher ground over anyone else when it comes to accessing. And it just like the Nervos network, it makes me think of like a seed, just like this little seed of life that is very easy to access, and like anyone, like it can just replicate everywhere and anywhere because it's so lightweight, because it's not a heavy reliant on data centers kind of node. It's just something that can be synced anywhere and everywhere all the time.
Yeah, and one other thing to mention with that, accessibility wise, is actually the fees are remarkably low on Nervos because they've separated the state rent from the transaction fees. Whereas like Ethereum is the best example of this, where they kind of mixed the two up. And so whenever you are paying for a transaction, and part of the reason that the fees are so high is because you're paying for that storage, right? You're paying to put stuff in the state, which has gotten out of control, and there's no incentive to remove it from the state, which is a big problem. So the state just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And even if you did shrink part of the state, if you were to remove data from it, they don't give you any of that ether back, because it was all paid in a transaction fee. It wasn't explicitly paid for state rent. So nobody does. So it gets bigger and bigger. It's getting more and more unsustainable. And everybody's paying these absurdly high rates to do basic transactions. Whereas on Nervos, it's different. The state rent fee is segregated from the transaction fee. And the state rent fee, by the way, is refundable. So if you store data on the chain and you later take it back off again, you've done what they want you to do. Get data that doesn't matter, get it off the chain. When you do that, you get your deposit back. And so the only fee that you're paying is just the basic transaction fee, which is
Yeah.
for basically transmission and computation, which is cheap. And that stuff right now, it's a fraction of the penny for whatever you want to do. And it's in time, like, of course, like, if the network was congested, it would raise a little bit because it is an auction-based system, but I don't believe that it will ever go to the same levels as Ethereum will, because of that what I just noted is that they've segregated the two, right? The state rent is separate, so you're paying for computation and transmission, which are inherently cheap. Those are cheap costs when you look at operating a blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so would you would you say that because Ethereum is becoming so unsustainable, do you think that it is antiquated technology in the same sense that Bitcoin is antiquated technology, incentive wise? And that's why we need something like Nervos to exist, because it is an evolution. Because like you said, um, like the rent, you actually can get back what you can get your deposit back. And that's like common sense. Like that makes sense to humans. But like in Ethereum, that's not the case. So it's like Ethereum is just like a very non-intuitive economic model compared to Nervos.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you have different ways that they look at it internally. Like, for example, within the Bitcoin community, there's a lot of the demographic there is really kind of they've attached themselves to certain beliefs. Like I mentioned, the 21 million Bitcoin thing. They are hard set on that, and they don't want to change it. There's a lot of things also that they don't want to change within the smart contract system that they do have, which is very limited. And there's resistance to making it more adaptable to anything because they're afraid of exploits being found, right? So it's a very conservative mindset, and um, there are there are of course benefits to that kind of a mindset. After all, they have done remarkably well. They still have the crown in terms of market cap, so they're trying to make sure that they don't have a disaster, which is very desirable. But the flip side of that is it's not evolving. Like Bitcoin's technology, in my opinion, is completely genius for when it was released.
Yeah.
But today it is antiquated. It has not kept up at all. We're looking at, we're coming up on 15 years. I guess it is 15 years at this point, and it's largely the same. It moves remarkably slow, and it's just not keeping pace. Like there's a large segment of the Bitcoin community that, for the longest time, wanted to ignore everything that Ethereum had done with smart contracts and say that it was all just a bunch of noise and that it was all scams. And it's pretty obvious at this point it wasn't. Ethereum took the world by storm, the blockchain world by storm again when they came out, right? They came out, when was it? Was it 2014,
Yeah.
2015? They changed the landscape. They completely changed the landscape. They made it possible to do what we had all wanted to do on blockchains, but we couldn't do on Bitcoin. They made all that possible, but they are now at a place where they're starting to hit the end of the road too, where they're a lot of the decisions they made, which were quick decisions, things that made it easy for developers, but there was no real path forward on them, which they kind of just said, we'll solve it in the future, right? They kicked the can down the road, and now they're finding out that there's no good path out and that it's going to take a major changes to the chain to rectify some of these things, and they're not really able to do it. And I am an investor in Bitcoin and Ethereum, by the way. So if anybody is out there is thinking, oh,
Right.
he's just ragging on these, no, no, actually, my largest holding right now is in Ethereum. I bought it a long time ago. I got very lucky, and it rose up quite a bit. But and I'm holding on to it. I'm not necessarily selling because I think there's potential there. But I am scared for my investment right now. I don't like the direction that they're going on a lot of things. Whereas a lot of the things that Nervos has done really are the next generation to me, right? I see them, the way that they always put it is that they're building on top of the shoulders of giants, and I believe that that is a very accurate analogy, right? They've examined very well what has worked and what has not worked, and they put together a system that really solves many of the issues out there that there's a lot of projects which are not even they haven't even gotten to a point where they're investigating the problems yet, right? Like there's so many chains out there that don't have state rent and are not really even seriously considering it yet. But it's a big problem. It's one that has to be solved. And there is no good solution out there for many of these chains, especially the ones that follow Ethereum, because Ethereum doesn't have a good answer yet.
Yeah, well, a lot of projects just follow like in step with Ethereum and they didn't try to innovate on the tokenomics or the rent model or like anything really. They just tried to make Ethereum faster. That was like one of the biggest things. Like I don't want to say Solana because it's like kind of comparing apples to oranges, but like Solana was just like a faster Ethereum for a lot of people. And Nervos is fascinating because they went back to the UTXO design. So they sort of took a step backwards and said, this is actually good technology. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to Bitcoin. Let's let's maintain the UTXO model and like expand upon it because the account model has all these pitfalls of security, lack of determinism, lack of parallelism, um, all of these things. There's so many things you could say about account model where you can look at the UTXO model and say, yeah, UTXOs are actually really ingenious way for programming um, when it comes to, you know, distributed databases and decentralized finance.
Yeah, they're actually really good, and I was not a believer in this in the beginning. Like after, I would say before I heard about Nervos and the way that they did things, I was completely sold on Ethereum's account model and that that was the way forward. And it was purely because of the ease of use. It is easier. It is absolutely easier to make a smart contract on the account model than it is on a UTXO model. And a lot of that is just because it is intuitive for the way that we as programmers we typically develop in certain ways in most languages, and it lines up exactly with Ethereum.
Yeah.
So it's just much easier intuitively. When you start going into the UTXO model, it's confusing as all hell when you first start looking at it because it's completely different than the way that you're used to doing it. And the analogy I always use with this is when we all start programming for the first time, we use single thread applications, very basic little things that are working on one single core. Whenever you take the step into multi-core, which there's a lot of developers out there who never actually do, like web developers, for example, they pretty much stick to one core. They don't have to experience the pain of multi-core programming. And believe me, it is painful sometimes. You lead up to all kinds of synchronization issues and bizarre things which are strangely, actually I'm not going to say strangely because they are fundamental computer science problems that we hit with blockchains too. The difference is that on a computer processor, these things that are blocking operations and slowing things down in multi-core processors, they're occurring in a billionth of a second, right? So we don't notice them as users, but there's a lot of pain that developers had to go through to get it to work properly. Now on a blockchain, it's a little bit different because instead of taking a fraction of a second, your delay is the block itself, right? So in that case, like with Ethereum, it's like 15 seconds every 15 seconds or so. Nervos is about the same between 10 and 20 seconds typically. That's where you're going to have this block. So if you end up with a block waiting for some kind of a confirmation or something that you are dependent on to do your next operation, there's a big holdup. So it requires a lot more engineering, is what I'm getting at. To get around these fundamental computer science issues, we have to do more engineering to get around them as developers. But the thing is, there's no real other way to do it because um, with the account model, what is the solution that sharding is doing? It's effectively saying, here's another computer, right? We are solving the multi-core problem by creating an entirely new computer over there, right? That's what a shard is. It's a separate network. Create more networks. Those have fundamental issues too on scalability also, especially when you're trying to use all the same token. So it's what do you want to use? Do you want to use single thread with a lot of different computers, or do you want to use multi-core, which is the direction we're already going in anyway? Every computer is multi-core. Your phones are multi-core. You need to use those cores. So that's what UTXO is doing. It's enabling parallelization in a really big way.
That's awesome. That's a beautiful explanation of it. I've never really even heard of it explained that way, but I love it because I'm not a programmer, so I don't know the nuances of that. And that was very enlightening. Thank you. So UTXO is the way to go, is what you are getting at.
I believe so. I believe so, and it's not like there's not challenges out there. There absolutely still are. And there's a lot of different ways to get around the problem, which is also a problem in itself because one of the things that we experience when somebody's coming into Nervos for the first time and saying, "How do I do this?" is they say, "I have this problem," and then we have to look at it and say, "What's the way to solve this for them?" Right? Well, there's sometimes like 5 different ways, and there's so few developers that are experts. There's so few teams that have actually tried all of these different pathways. It's kind of like I can't make a strong recommendation on any one or the other yet, just because we don't have the benefit of time at this point where we've tried things and watched them either fail or succeed over time and find what are the best methods, what is actually working for developers and is the most intuitive for you. We don't really know too well, right? And this is the same in Nervos as it is in Cardano, as it is in Ergo, and every other UTXO chain that has these that is truly UTXO's base is dealing with these same exact issues.
Yeah, Cardano always got a bunch of flack for sticking with the UTXO model, and like things were always very complicated. And it's like the Ethereum community basically, some of them basically started making fun of Cardano for using what they thought was like old and broken tech, and it was too hard and too difficult to use. The learning curve was too shallow for people to ever get familiar with UTXOs, so no one would ever use it. But it's like the thing is Ethereum's account, or the account model itself, is so easy, but it's like I don't know a good analogy for it, but it's like saying like we have arithmetic, so we don't need, so calculus is silly. It's like ignoring something that's more, maybe more difficult, but also expresses more things and helps you make more complex and efficient structures and designs.
Yeah, well, it kind of comes down to the single core, multi-core thing again, right? Like in computers, we had a really good run on single core processors, right? If you remember, like all of the ones in the 90s and the 2000s and the early ones, like it was pretty rare to see a multi-core processor, and they just kept making the processors go faster and faster and faster. That works really well. Like I said, developers love the single core model. That is easiest thing to work with. So we just kept going down that route. But then something happened. We started hitting the physical limitations of silicon. They couldn't shrink it down fast enough anymore. And so we needed more power. And the only way that they could do that is to increase the core count. So now, like we have cores, like I think my computer's got 16 cores in it or something, and the number just keeps going up. That's the only way that they know how to go forward. We can't just infinitely increase speed. And so again, you're going back to a system supposed to be the global settlement layer for the entire world. How are you going to scale that? You can't do it on a single core processor, right? It has to, we need more, and we need to do a lot more with less if you want to keep it decentralized. So for that kind of a system, it's not even an option anymore, right? You can't keep it single core. So the account model has to change dramatically, and we haven't seen that innovation yet. Like this is one area where every once in a while there's something that makes its way through the news saying about like they say like, oh, we're finding ways to scale the account model, and we're gonna run things in parallel. And then I go in and I look at the solution, and it's very disappointing on what they're suggesting, right? It doesn't really work right. I would love to see a solution that can do that, that can actually scale the account model to multiple cores effectively that can parallelize it. I'm not seeing it yet, and I don't know that we ever will, because we can just look at what computer processors did for decades, right? If they could do that, if they could infinitely scale a single core, they would, because that is the easy route for developers.
Mm, yeah. So I just this makes me wonder, has Nervos considered using this analogy for their marketing and for their like trying to explain to people why UTXO is the way to go, like the single core versus multi-core analogy. Have you guys considered that?
I've used it in some developer materials, and I would like to do some more videos on that. I don't know that it's ever necessarily been considered by marketing,
Mm.
but absolutely. Let's If you think that's the way to go, I mean, like you know who to talk to. Talk to Matt. Mention it to him.
Yeah,
He'd
well, that's
probably be
just
receptive to that.
it's just interesting because I'm not even a programmer, but the way you explained it to me, the what you said, like single core versus multi-core, that's actually really digestible and easy to comprehend when it comes to deciding which one to go with.
Oh, well, thanks. It took me a long time to come up with that, because I actually had to really think about what the fundamental problem with blockchains was, and I realized it was the exact same thing.
That's awesome. That's very fascinating. Okay. So okay, what's new with Nervos? You said you had a couple of things you could talk
Oh
about.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we just had the town hall yesterday, which is public. That's on YouTube. There's a whole bunch of stuff that came out. Let's see, released the annual report, which has a whole bunch of stuff about the grants and stuff that were given. Some of the highlights, though, we had the light client come out recently, which is great, because it's a fully decentralized light client, meaning you don't have to sync the full chain, but you don't have to, it's not trusting anybody. Like MetaMask, you're effectively offloading to somebody else, whereas this one is connecting directly to the blockchain. So you don't have to trust anybody, but you
Yeah,
don't have to download the entire chain. It's great for like wallets and stuff, and we want to see some dApps build with that in the future too. They added support for quantum resistant lock scripts. They just released one,
nice.
so that's another one. We're ahead of the game on that. If quantum computers start squishing blockchains out there and destroying their security, we'll have a backup ready. We Let's see, they had some speakers from DID, which is the .bit thing, completely decentralized, like .eth. If you're familiar with the .eth domain name kind of things, there's
Yep.
one called .bit. Great project. I recommend anybody to check it out. NFT Nation did a presentation about their upcoming changes to. They're coming to L1. They built on Godwoken, which was our L2 EVM, coming to L1 in a big way, and they're going to be doing a big partnership with Blitz TCG. Nervape was showing off some of their stuff. They've had some really cool little 3D printed ape like designs that I really thought were really neat. I think that's Echo putting those together. They look fantastic. They've been all over Twitter. Um, Let's see, what else was new? Cryptape. Oh, they're launching Spore, which is a fully on-chain NFT protocol. So that's 100% of the data on chain, including the image and stuff itself too. So there's like millions of NFTs out there that in time will stop functioning properly. Because they're using traditionally backed um, just hosting for their image data,
Right.
and eventually that's somebody's going to stop paying the bill, and then that's it. Your NFT doesn't work anymore. Spore is an alternative to that, where you can put it all 100% on chain, and there's a downside to that, which is you're going to have to pay the state rent for it. It's going to be a little bit pricey, but if it's something expensive, genuinely expensive, that shouldn't be a deterrent at all. You just want to make sure it exists forever. This is a way to do it. And then let's see, they announced Cell Studios announced, which is a new company coming out of kind of coming out of Nervina, which is part of the BTCKB initiative. So I guess I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% a part of the BTCKB initiative, but that's like there's a lot of parallels between Nervos and Bitcoin, obviously, and so they want to take advantage of that, right? They're trying to provide benefits to the BTC users, and they're hoping that in return, like they'll see more users come over to Nervos in a certain way from the BTC community. So they're trying to find new ways to bridge that, and with their products and their wallets and everything. So they haven't really announced anything yet, so we'll see what comes out of that. And then there was more stuff about payment channels that's coming out. I guess they're also trying to get Perun to do something that links up Bitcoin's Lightning network with Perun Lightning, which are I think they're starting with payment channels on CKB, but eventually we want to get to state channels as well. So anyway, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that
Yeah.
was coming out yesterday. It's exciting to see some of the new developments that are coming out. Oh, and one last thing I should mention is day before that, in an interview with Kevin Wang, who's one of the co-founders of Nervos, about Kalani, the new version of Kalani that they're putting out. And so that is still in the works. It doesn't sound like it's as far along as we would hope it would be, but it's very interesting what they're trying to do. Very ambitious. They're working on a decentralized intents platform,
Yeah.
which is really that's one that's like kind of next level. Like you were just starting to see in the general blockchain industry, they're starting to talk about intents, right?
Yeah.
Which is instead of signing a transaction that does one specific thing, like saying I'm going to go to Uniswap and swap this coin for this coin at this price, you're basically indicating intent on the blockchain, which is I would like to swap this coin for this other coin. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care what chain it's on. Get that coin to me and I will buy it, right? By launching that kind of intent, it's going to lower prices for everybody because it's inspiring competition between different chains, between people they're called solvers, which are automated bots, which are effectively racing to get you the best price as quickly as possible, right? So they're inspiring competition to fulfill user desires, their intents. So anyway, that project is being built right now. It's probably going to take at least a couple more months, I would say, before they start to release more information in the early developer materials. But it's one that I'm paying a lot of attention to because it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, intents are they're mind blowing. I mean, it's I think it's another like shallow learning curve where people are gonna take a while to get to understand what they really are because it gets really technical and really weedy like real quick when you try to dive into it. But the the concept of instead of a single transaction um being like I want to swap this token for that token and changing it into um sort of like like I don't know how to describe it, but like a more generalized statement saying like swap any of these things under this circumstance, and then solvers like come in to fulfill those things based on the requirements. So it's just do you think it's like is it like a form of automation in smart contract languages?
It absolutely is. Like it requires automation is the thing. It requires, well, it's built off of account abstraction, which is another word that is making its way through the industry. And there's proposals in Ethereum right now on how to add that. And it's from what I understand, it's not going too well. There's challenges that they're dealing with. But this is something that Nervos has had since mainnet launch. When they actually launched it, they didn't know what to call it, right? The account abstraction was not the word they were using because that wasn't a term known by the industry. But it really just means that a smart contract can control whether or not your funds are sent or received or anything. It's controlling your wallet with another program. And that's absolutely essential for any kind of automation. And the example I always use with this is like say that you wanted to buy a token or send a token to a distant network, and you had to jump through two networks, right? It's two hops to get there. I had to go to this network to get to this network. You would have to sign the transaction on this network. Then once it gets there, you have to sign the transaction again, and you have to keep and so on and so forth. Every steps requires you to wait and sign again. and that's because it doesn't have account abstraction. If account abstraction was in place, you could just sign the request and it would go all the way across because it would understand that it's supposed to release once it gets to the second chain because your destination is the third chain. So it's kind of those two concepts are they're built on each other, right? Intense is again built on account abstraction. It's using the fact that the smart contract now controls the funds, and then putting on top of it another layer, which is kind of like the language and standards that everybody needs to be able to understand each other, to speak the same language and understand what the actual intent is. You need that to be built. So that's kind of what Kalani is putting together.
And is Tanner involved in Kalani?
Yeah. He's actually the CTO of Kalani now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, he alluded to that when I was messaging him. He said he was working on that, and yeah, I mean it makes sense because he was very much ahead of his time. I mean, he's always ahead of his time, but when it came to Intense, he was very much advocating for them way before they became a topic in the crypto space. So,
Yeah, he's been talking about it for a while, and validity is his creation, the validity language, which is what is used to describe intents. I mean, that project he started that I think also with Kevin at one point under the name Tempest, which
yeah.
it was another unfortunate victim of the implosion of the industry when FTX collapsed,
Yeah.
and it took down, who knows how many hundreds of projects with it, possibly thousands. When that happened, yeah, he was no longer able to secure funding. I think his investor pulled out, and it kind of got shelved for a while, but it came back. It sounds like it's been merged with Kalani, and they've improved it, right? The system that he put together, when you marry it with what Kalani was trying to do with cross-chain liquidity, all of a sudden you get a product that makes a lot more sense for both of them, right? That is really powerful and could actually change the way that money moves across all networks in the future.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I was basically involved with Tanner's activity around Intense and around validity in the in-between space. Like after Tempest and the implosion thing occurred, but before he joined Kalani, in that in-between space, he was trying to get, and it was right after he tried to do a Nervos proposal to do like a mastering Nervos book, and people were not in favor of it. And then right after that, he was like, okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna read I'm gonna do Tempest 2.0. And I was helping him get funding at the time. He had a funding goal. And we came like so close to reaching it, but didn't hit the goal in time, sadly. And then I had to take a sabbatical from the space as well. So I'm just like I'm super happy that things worked out and that he's able to fulfill his vision when it comes to intent.
Yeah, I had no idea you were involved with that. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean trying to raise during a catastrophic bull market where uh, you just had somebody go to jail for being the largest fraud in all of history. That's not a good time to be trying to raise money in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money. It was, and I wasn't reaching out to like venture capital funds or anything like that. It was more like private, individual investors that I was trying to secure funds from. And oh boy, that was a lot of work. And because it wasn't the right time, like it was very bad timing. Like no one wanted to um get into something new. Everyone was already like just trying to like hunker down and like survive the bear market. So it was just a hard time to convince people to invest in something so abstract, and there wasn't even a token to invest in at the beginning. It was more like it was more like starter capital to get the project going. So, and then there would be like, you know, so there was a reward system in place for the people who did early investing, and it was very generous amount, percentage wise, of what would be the future revenue. But those people, like the people who didn't go for it, they really missed out on something that could have been big. So yeah, I'm glad that Tanner finally found a home for his idea. That's because I hadn't talked to him in a while, and that's just really that's a really good happy ending to the story.
I think it's more of a happy beginning,
Right.
right? They have a long road to go on that. The potential for it is absolutely gigantic. If they're successful, they're going to change the way that money moves in across the entire world. If they're not successful, well, then they're in the bucket with thousands of other projects. But like what they're trying to do is it is very ambitious, but there's such a strong need for it even now. Like if they can pull it off and get some interest, like it could just explode. Because like we're talking about how do you when you get into the things of finance, right? Um, there's billions and billions of dollars moving around every day. You talk about a way to move the needle, make it a little bit easier, a little bit cheaper. It only needs to be a couple fractions of a percent. Now you're talking about big money. Just that fractions of a percent, that's tens of millions, hundreds of millions. Like any person who operates some kind of a DApp that does a trading or any of those types of financial trading services, they should be jumping at something like this. If they see an opportunity to optimize 1%, that is a huge gain for them.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all very like in my mindset, all this is very marketable, and people should hop on, jump, be like pouncing on stuff like this, if they just understand it, and if someone reached out to them and told them about it. And funny enough, I just messaged Jane. I don't even I don't even know what her current position or role is anymore, but I had like a networking slash marketing proposal for her, for Nervos, because I um I thought the timing was right, personally, for myself to try to do something for them again and contribute in a way that is bigger than I ever did, and sort of makes up for any sort of like negative impact that I had in the past, because of like nervous drama and stuff like that. I just thought it was a perfect time to um throw my hat back in the ring. And I just messaged Jane because I think like everything that's going on, um people need to hear about Nervos. And I'm like I'm trying to be modest here, but I'm very skilled at marketing, it's not marketing, networking with people. And I think I can get Nervos into, like, the conversation, like into the top 100 coins and stuff like that. I mean, it's an ambitious goal, but I think I can definitely help out. So I just yeah, I just was wanted to announce that because yeah.
Yeah, yeah, well, definitely, like, if she doesn't respond in a timely manner, let me know, alright? I'll make sure that it gets some attention.
No, yeah, no, I just she just got back to me just now, just
Oh,
before
she
the
did?
call.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, great, great.
Yeah, so we're in communication and all that. I gave her my quick 5-minute pitch over voice. So I sent her a little voice message. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Um, that's awesome. I think we covered what Nervos is, why UTXOs are good, um, why intents are awesome, and like all the exciting things happening with Nervos, and also that that thing about the single core versus multi-core analogy, which I think we could definitely leverage marketing wise to sort of kick account models ass. So um that's probably it for questions I have about Nervos. Do you have any questions about Ergon? And I should preface that I've already done like 7 calls today, so I'm a little gassed. So please go easy on me.
Okay. Yeah, it's see where would I start on that? I mean, like you've given me a couple different versions of the elevator pitch. Do you have a new one though? I guess I should ask that first. Do you have a new elevator pitch on what it is?
Sure. My current elevator pitch on what Ergon is it takes Bitcoin's core uh code because it's a Bitcoin Cash code fork. So it has the 8 megabit block size just so that it's not expensive to use at scale. And all they did was basically change the block reward from static to dynamic so that the block reward that you get is proportional to the amount of hashes that you do. And because it's not a fixed reward, people aren't competing for the same coins. They're sort of everyone it's sort of like how mining works in the real world where it's not like there's one fixed rate of gold supply coming in and everyone has to compete for that amount of gold. It's gold all over the world and people can like set up all of their own mining operations. And what this ultimately means is that you have supply elasticity so that supply actually meets demand. And because the production cost of making Ergon is fixed, there's this theory of production cost that it's kind of like a a branch off of like the labor theory of value, which is that if you created something that costed you, $5 to create, you wouldn't sell it for less than $5. You would sell it for $5 or more than $5. So it basically means that there's a fixed production cost value of producing an Ergon so that it has a fundamentally stable value that the market has to discover.
Right, right. And then so are you last time we spoke, you didn't really like calling it a stable coin though. Is that still the case or is it
Uh, you know, it, I l- I wouldn't say I don't like calling it a stable coin. It's just that the name there's like this like this is tendency in the crypto space to call things what they aren't. Like DeFi is not actually decentralized stable coins. In this case, I think Ergon is an actual stable coin, but things like USDT, USDC, they own the term stable coin. So if I called Ergon a stable coin, it would essentially make people think that it's a pegged currency with like an oracle and like collateral like dollars or ETH put behind it. It creates the wrong image in people's heads. So I guess like stable coin is just like a no-go in terms of marketing it.
yeah, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, the stable coin is almost it's almost taboo in some ways
Yeah.
also because there's algorithmic stable coins which are inherently different
Yeah.
and they've all for the most part failed.
Like Luna.
And yeah, yeah, they all seem to have massive problems. So if you call yourself an algorithmic stablecoin, you immediately have a lot of doubt behind it. This isn't really that though. This is not algorithmic. This is more like market induced stablecoin or something. Like maybe market incentivized stable coin.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
free
like,
market. Yeah,
yeah, like I see that it gets ultimately tied to the value of electricity or energy, I guess. Any whatever way that you can power these miners is ultimately what the cost is. So the part though that I get what you're saying about not wanting to sell it at less than you paid for it, of course, but at the same time, that doesn't always hold true with miners. Um, as somebody who was a miner, I owned a mid-sized facility for a while. Sometimes you end up selling at a loss during bad periods, and it's not because you don't want to; it's because you have to. You have
right,
bills to pay.
right.
So I don't know that that's necessarily always a hard truth. I mean, in the long term, maybe. I'll give it a maybe. The one part that really is a little bit confusing to me, though, on how it's going to maintain an effective long-term peg with electricity is that it's one way. It's a conversion from energy to a token, but because you can't return the token back to energy, I mean, that would be a firm peg. Like if you could actually do that, if there was the technology exists, then it would be guaranteed peg. So now it's more of a soft kind of peg,
Yeah,
which which
soft peg is
yeah.
a perfect definition for it. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, so that's where it gets like I've thought about it a couple times. And I'm not 100% convinced it's going to hold. I mean, at the same time, it's like I have to give the flip side of it, which is all money is basically a collective delusion with people that something that doesn't have value has value. So if everybody that holds Ergon believes that it will peg to the cost of electricity, then it probably will. Um, so I have to acknowledge that because obviously money does work in our society. It has from thousands and thousands of years. So it could.
yeah,
But I still I remain somewhat in this area of this of skepticism
right.
because it's new territory too. Like there's nothing else like this that has
Yeah.
tried to do this exactly. We have nothing to base it off of. We don't know if it is.
Well, the thing is there are things like this in the real world because of how commodities work. Like when you need more, when there's more demand for shoes, for example, people make more shoes until the price reaches an equilibrium to the point where it's not profitable to make more shoes, and you get a price stability through that. But to go back to what you were saying about um, money just being like sort of a psychological thing, and that Ergon could achieve stability through the psychology of it. I don't even think you have to depend on that necessarily. I think there's free market forces that ultimately, once Ergon is liquid enough and utilized everywhere, that it will be fundamentally stable because, like you said, not every mine, it's not always the case that a miner is going to sell for profit. They're going to sell at a loss sometimes because they got to pay the bills and stuff like that. But that that scenario in which they sell at a loss is just an opportunity for someone else to buy an Aragon for cheaper than it costs to produce. So they buy it up, and that pushes the price back towards the equilibrium. So the free market forces at play actually tighten the price more and more over time as more people understand how it works and more people get involved and it gets more liquid.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that that's a pretty solid thesis to work off of. The part that it depends on though is that it's saying that there's an inherent demand for the token. So like with your shoe analogy, there's already demand for the shoes, right? That's why because they have actual utility. So with
Yeah.
Aragon, you're saying that your utility is basically you're going after money, but you're also but it's not okay, let me back up. Why don't you explain to me what is the utility of the token that people want specifically?
Well, the creator, he would say that it's simply to be peer-to-peer digital cash. And that's why he built it, because he wanted to verbatim take Satoshi's words of saying, I'm building a peer-to-peer digital cash, and he wanted to actually implement that in an economically sound way, because the fixed supply of Bitcoin makes it fundamentally unstable. So the utility is what Bitcoin was originally meant to do.
I
And
see.
that's
Okay.
where the demand would come from.
Right. Okay. So because because it doesn't have the volatility, the same level of volatility, that means that people who people can't really do wild investments in it, right?
Right,
We're probably not going to see 100x on something like this.
right.
So where does the growth come from? Like what is going to we have what 10, 20,000 different currencies
So
out there at this point?
So the growth comes from actually using it as a currency in business, like people who are trying to run a brick and mortar store and use cryptocurrency to accept cryptocurrency from people, and or even automated market makers and liquidity provision, because a lot of people understand that in automated market makers, decentralized exchanges, there's this concept of impermanent loss, because of volatile assets, um, the value, uh oh God, I suck at explaining this part, but the value of the assets, when they fluctuate, they create this sort of imbalance that arbitrageurs take advantage of, and it extracts coins from one side of the pair to the arbitrager, and that's how automated market maker pools rebalance themselves. So the more volatile an asset is, the more impermanent loss market makers incur. And the thing about Ergon is that if it becomes relatively stable, or even becomes fundamentally stable, um, basically it has less impermanent loss than something like Ethereum or BTC. So it's more profitable to do liquidity provision in Ergon than any other cryptocurrency. So these are all examples, or each of those two examples show that the demand for Ergon is the fact that it is good money, and it's good for liquidity provision and market making and using for buying and selling stuff. So that's where the demand comes from. I forget what your original question was, though.
I mean, you basically answered it. It was what around what is, like why what kind of why you're actually going to invest in this, right? What is the main
Right,
draw
right,
to it?
right.
And
Business. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it is the stability aspect is in a when you're talking about any kind of a currency, especially peer to peer or anything like a business. When a business wants to receive a currency, let's say let's go into the future and say that the dollar is no longer viable for most businesses because it's hyperinflating. What do you go to next, right? They have to go to something else. Bitcoin today, Bitcoin would probably be that alternative because it has a large market cap, but it's we all know that that's extremely volatile as well.
yes,
Um, a large corporation that's working off a 2% margin cannot use Bitcoin.
right.
Um, they might do very well, but they could also be wiped out overnight. Um, they would need something that has some kind of a stronger guarantee. And I'd never really thought about it this way. Every business, their costs are ultimately tied to the cost of energy.
Yeah,
Um, so it makes sense that their currency also be tied to the cost of energy, right?
yeah.
Um, Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is actually a kind of an important thought for me. Wait a minute. What if the cost of energy goes down though? Their production cost goes down. Is that in the right direction? Does that hurt them or does that help them? Wait a minute. Their costs go down. The cost of their goods are going to go down, but at the same time, their holdings in Ergon would lose value as well. But it wouldn't matter.
It
Well,
would,
you mentioned this before. It
yeah,
wouldn't matter. It's equal. It's equal. So they're
yeah,
maintaining the same exact value.
yes,
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
yeah. See, yeah, I'm glad we had this conversation. Uh, yeah, so it makes a little more,
Right.
I hope it makes a little more sense now. Yeah.
It does. It does. I think so. Yeah. Um yeah, I can see what he's trying to do better now. It makes sense. And when you're talking about you're trying to do some kind of a global cash system, you need to tie it to something. We can't live with everything being completely relative to everything else. Um, it really helps in a lot of exchanges, global exchanges, to have some kind of a fundamental base, and you're just tying it to the one thing that is fundamental to everybody, which is energy.
Right. Right. And it's fundamental to the process of everything, like not just hashing itself, but like, building like the silicon chips, like the whole process, all of that, everything requires energy. Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely like the right rationale to pursue sort of a digital global stable currency. And that's why I've been absolutely obsessed with it for the past 7 months, and I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop talking about it. I started this podcast like 4 days ago, and I've already done 7 episodes. Like I didn't in a couple of days I did more than one. But yeah, just there's just so much to talk about. It just doesn't end. So like if you want to dive any deeper, I would recommend going backwards, because like the first episode that we did was 3 hours long, like you pointed out, and it was kind of slow. And I didn't really, I was sort of letting things go off topic too much and stuff like that. So that's kind of why it got long. But closer to this one, like the one I just did right before this one, only an hour, very on topic, very to the point, and very interesting stuff that we didn't even cover here that is really important to think about as well. So I'd recommend the last episode personally.
Okay, well, yeah, yeah. I'm actually halfway through it, but I got to get through the second half.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, cool. All right. Any other questions about it?
I think we're probably a little over time here, so we should probably wrap for today. But
Yeah.
I can
Um,
I can guarantee you I will have more questions and more things I'm skeptical about on the
good.
project. But we had a little bit of a breakthrough here for me today. I think I finally
Cool.
get the vision that you guys were trying to achieve, and I think there's potential behind it. Right? If I was going to say, just if I was going to say like we in the future we end up in a period where we need to use stables for certain things, I could see this being a viable player, right? I could see this being as a preferred alternative to USDC or something like that.
Yeah, 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 because it has more big when it comes to values and fundamentals, it's closer to Bitcoin than it is to USDC or USDT. So it definitely appeals to people's love of decentralization and permissionlessness and censorship resistance, as well as having like fundamental stability. So yeah, I really appreciate you doing this call with me. It means a lot, and I had a lot of fun talking. And the Nervos stuff and the Ergon stuff was both very engaging and interesting topics. So I'm sure the people at Ergon will enjoy listening to this one. And I'll share it I'll share it around so you can get some coverage too, and Nervos can get some coverage, and anyone else who's kept skeptical or curious or has questions can also like check out the Aragon part of this to see for themselves how it works logically.
Yeah, for sure. I had fun too. I always enjoy learning about new projects with potential, and um, I like what you guys are doing. I can say that now. Finally, I'm to the point where I can actually say, yeah, this has some merit behind it. So yeah, of course, we'll do this again sometime in the future.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll have more questions.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to have Matt on next week. So,
Oh, great, fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Thank you so
He's
much.
he's not yeah, he's not sold on it yet, is he? I'm just curious of where he's
Uh,
starting from.
I don't, well, you know, Matt, he's just like skeptic. He just loves being skeptical.
He's
So
the ultimate skeptic. He's
yeah, yeah,
skeptical
yeah.
about everything. He's
He
skeptical about Nervos sometimes. Okay,
yeah, yeah,
he's a
yeah,
super
yeah.
skeptic.
Yeah, he understands it. He's just still like trying to poke holes in it like as much as he can, which is nice to have around. But I need more of that. Like he needs to come on and badger us and like really press us for like an hour so we can answer his questions.
Oh yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, I'll make sure I watch that one too.
Sweet. All right. Thank you so much, dude.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.